Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, it's Brian Parker, Director of Education, back to hang out with you for another episode. Today we are diving back into the world of dietary supplements. One of the ingredients that has grown in popularity in the supplement industry is something called DHEA. This is short for Dehydroepiandrosterone, which is something I invite you to say 5 times fast. To learn more about this ingredient, we're going to talk with John Travis from NSF. John is the technical manager over at NSF, and he's got more than 25 years of experience in analyzing dietary supplements. He's got a special expertise in analyzing supplements for ingredients that are prohibited by anti-doping organizations. This was actually instrumental in developing the screening methods that NSF uses for their Certified for Sport program, which is something we've talked about on this show before. So we talked with John about what DHEA is, how it functions in the body, its use in supplements, and why the product is banned by anti-doping agencies. We also discussed the reasons people take DHEA products in the first place, which include anti-aging, muscle development, sexual function, medical conditions, and more. And then we also take a look at potential side effects and the need for more research in this area, all while discussing the future of DHEA and the supplement industry as a whole. We appreciate John for his time today, and we really appreciate NSF Certified for Sport for all of their support over the years. Topics like this are exactly why it's so important to only purchase and take products that have been third-party tested. We're going to talk about that with John, and welcome into the show right now. Hey, John, welcome to the show. How are we doing today?
I'm doing excellent, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with us. I'm looking forward to this episode. I always am. I love doing these things because for me, I know these are really beneficial to our listeners. We cover all kinds of variety of different topics, but I also use them all as learning experiences for myself. What we're going to discuss today is a topic that I get a lot of questions about over the course of the programs and presentations that we do. So I know that if I'm getting those questions, other people have those questions as well. So I'm looking forward to tackling this topic with you, which is something we will do here in just a minute. But before we get into the weeds on DHEA, let's learn a little bit more about you. I always think that's a great place to start. So here's your broadest question of the day. Give us a little bit about your background, and I'll leave that open to you on what you want to share. Probably anything about your story relating to education, career path leading up to what you do now would be a good place for us to start.
John Travis here. I've been at NSF the 28 years this February, so a longtime veteran here at NSF. For about 25 and a half of those years, I was an analytical chemist in our labs here. I have the unique experience of working on supplements and doping substances. I did that for probably since 2004 when we launched Certified for Sport. So that'd be 19 years now. I've been doing it for a long time. It's a funny story about that. When we launched our dietary supplement certification program, Dr. Larry Bestovelt was our chief science officer at that time. She came down to our lab looking for a volunteer to lead the analytical chemistry charge for analyzing dietary supplements. And I like to joke that, I wasn't paying attention, just kind of fiddling and fooling around. Everyone took a step back, and I was left standing there. So I was the volunteer that got to do it. But all joking aside, it has really been a great experience being involved in the world of supplements from an analytical testing perspective, and then also the intersection of analytical chemistry, dietary supplements, and anti-doping.
Yeah, sometimes you volunteer for things you don't know what you're getting into, but I think they got the right person for the gig. You've been in this for a while now, and we'll talk about NSF a good bit as we go. Probably anyone listening to this is familiar with NSF a little bit. If not, I'll put a little bit of info in the show notes. But John's really one of the ones that oversees their Certified for Sport program, which is basically a testing program, independent testing program for dietary supplements, and we'll weave in some of that information as we go along. In fact, we can do some of that right now. Let's learn a little bit more about what you're working on currently. So you're the technical manager over there at NSF. That's the title that they gave you. So tell us a bit more about what's involved with that position, right? So, I mean, good way to always phrase this is, what does your day-to-day look like? I know that it's going to vary some, but what kind of things are you operating on a fairly regular basis?
So 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to move from the lab and go from doing the analytical work to talking about the analytical work and utilizing my expertise to engage with the different stakeholders that are certified for sport program, whether it's folks like you at the Taylor Hooten Foundation, folks with Major League Baseball, National Football League, NCAA, and then certified brands. I mean, we have a lot of certified brands that seek advice and information about doping issues in sports. So a lot of my days are answering questions and doing research and digging into the facts and details to understand what they are and understand what substances are coming on the horizon that could potentially be doping substances that we need to develop test methods for to protect the athletes.
Yeah, that was a good way to kind of sum it up. I know that there's a lot that goes into your job, and really one of the good ways that anybody listening can learn more about not only what you do, but about NSF as a whole and the Certified for Sport program as a whole. We did a podcast episode about this. So already, like, you can go back and dig through and learn more about the NSF program and learn why independent testing is so important, and learn more about that process itself and learn about some of the regulation issues in the dietary supplement industry that lead to the importance of the work that you're doing. So there's some knowledge there. If you don't have it already, dig back through the All Me podcast page, and I'll put that episode in the show notes as well, so you can learn more about that process and why this program is so important. That'll give us even more background. But I want to spend the majority of our time today focusing on our topic. So you've spent a lot of time analyzing dietary supplements, right? Especially looking for ingredients that are prohibited by various anti-doping agencies. So one of the banned substances that we're seeing pop up now a lot in supplements is DHEA, which is our focus today. I'll try my best to say the official name of DHEA. It's dehydroepiandrosterone. I probably butchered that, John. Let me know if I did, right? But
Nailed
that's
it.
okay.
Nailed
Good. I practiced it a few times before you and I started hanging out. So that's what we're gonna really dive into today, because I get so many questions about it. What is it? What does it do for me? I've heard about this. It's popping up in supplements. So let's dive in here. The place for us to start that would just make the most sense, so then we can further develop the conversation a bit, is by you telling us what DHEA is. So give us the high level version of what that is, and then we'll dive into why we're seeing it pop up in products.
Very good. And please remind me if I start going analytical chemist on you and digging into the nitty-gritty details, pull me back. That's a passion of mine, and so pull me back from that abyss.
I will.
So DHEA, otherwise known as dehydroepiandrosterone, it's an androgenic steroid. It's produced by the adrenal gland in your body. The adrenal glands, the glands that sit right on top of your kidneys. In those glands, it is the substrate that eventually becomes DHEA. It's formed from cholesterol, and it undergoes undergoes three enzyme changes to produce DHEA. Really, it's not complicated.
That makes sense. And then so it does a few different things. Like, from my knowledge, right? It is a hormone that also eventually gets turned into sex hormones, male and female sex hormones, something like, testosterone being an example of that, right? So that's why, I get a lot of questions a lot, because of what it eventually turns into. And as DHEA, obviously, so it's something that's natural that we all produce. Is it also something that, similar to other hormones, decreases as we age? Does our body slowly start to produce less amount? And that's probably going to transition us into some of our next questions. But that's got to be one of the reasons we're seeing people supplement with it, right? If we're slowly produce less the longer that we're on the earth.
Yeah, I mean, the research shows that as we age, so from about our early 30s till our 80s, lose about 10% DHEA production per year over those decades. So yeah, about 50% over that time frame. DHEA, there's a lot. I think there are some misconceptions about DHEA and its androgenic activity in that it produces this, it's the main producer of the sex hormone testosterone. In reality, so in the male testes, DHEA is not the substrate that produces testosterone. Actually, the male testes uses regular acetate, so vinegar. Think acetate from vinegar, acetic acid, and it takes that in and forms cholesterol in the Leydig cells, and then that becomes testosterone. So it's really interesting in that for males, most of the testosterone comes from the testes, which is produced from acetate. Some testosterone created from DHEA from the circulation and peripheral tissues, but the majority of the male testosterone production is done by the testes. Now, an interesting thing there, Brian, is that, you know, a lot of this research is equivocal, so there's a lot of conflicting information in the research, but that one is pretty solid.
Interesting. So, I mean, I'm already learning something because, you know, from everything you start to hear, and this is just, I guess, kind of human reaction, right? Like, so we see a study here, and we just kind of run with it. Like, okay, so this must be happening. Like, this is the main driving force behind the production of sex hormones, right? So, you're telling me a little bit of knowledge that it's in the mix, but it's not the sole thing going on. So we may be overvaluing that role that it's playing, right? But again, all it takes is one study here for people to kind of run with it and say, well, this is the driving force of what this hormone is doing. But knowing that it's at least playing a role, all right, I'm going to guess that's one of the reasons why DHEA is now banned by most anti-doping agencies, whether it be WADA, IOC, NCAA, and more. It is a banned substance. So I got to imagine that that's partly because of the role that it is playing with the production of these hormones, right? So we know that it is banned, right? I'm a little bit curious about it starting to show up in supplements, right? So if it's a banned substance, right, is it still legal to produce as a supplement and purchase as a supplement? Basically, what I'm asking you now is, like, even though it is banned, does that mean I can go to the store and purchase this today? Is this something that I would have to get prescribed by a doctor because of a medical condition that I may have? It's showing up in supplements. Is that, you know, being done against the rules? Where does it show up in the supplement space in regards to the legality of it and the process of it?
Yeah, that is such a fascinating, interesting topic, and we'll get into that. So DHEA is a legal dietary ingredient in the United States.
Okay.
Now, different regulatory jurisdictions have different views on it. It may not be, and it's unlikely that it's legal in Europe and then Canada and other jurisdictions. I mean, I'm mostly familiar with the U.S., and we'll talk about that because that's probably most of your listening audience. So we'll dig into that here a little bit. So early 80s, 1970s, when the supplement industry began. So supplement industry has always been kind of a cottage industry. DHEA was sold in the health food stores as an anti-aging drug. Now, drug is probably the wrong term. Anti-aging supplement. Mm-hmm. So circa 1985, FDA banned all sales of DHEA in supplements. So from 1985 until the passage of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act in 1994, DHEA was prohibited in supplements. As soon as that act passed, and the ramifications of that act were that since DHEA was sold before 94 at some point in time as a legitimate dietary ingredient, it became available again for sale. So from 1984 till, let's go to 2004, fast forward. DHEA is on the shelf. It's sold as a supplement, as an ingredient in products. This is, if you recall, it's around the time of the Mitchell report that came out on Major League Baseball.
Yep.
Congress was developing an act called the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 2004. During deliberations for that act, the original version of it had DHEA as anabolic steroid and thus prohibited. Now, some of the dietary supplement caucus in Congress was up in arms about this because they still considered it and thought, and and still do think that DHEA is a legitimate dietary ingredient as the laws of DHEA are written. So some of the Congress people at that point in time threatened to tank the bill. At that point in time, the language of the bill was revised, and in that law, if you look at the public, I'm looking at my reference here for it. Public Law 108-358. So if you search that on the internet and you go through, that's the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 2004. It's got a specific call out that says anabolic steroid means any drug or hormonal substance chemically and pharmacologically related to testosterone. And then in parentheses, it's other than estrogens, progestins, corticosteroids, and now it says and dehydroepiandrosterone. So it got its carve out in the public law. So it is not considered an anabolic steroid by means of the law. And then fast forward 10 years, then we have the Designer Anabolic Control Act of 2014, otherwise known as Public Law 113260. I think that would have been changed at that point in time, had the same exact language, the same exact carve out, describing DHEA as not a hormonal or drug substance. So it's still a legitimate dietary ingredient in the U.S.
All right, that's good to know. I mean, that's a great history lesson. I didn't know that it had gone back and forth. I knew that it was legitimately used. It was being almost marketed as a result of that. And I knew a lot of that had to do with the DHEA Act. I'm going to put that in our show notes as well, because if people are not familiar with that 94 Act that passed, honestly, it's still really the legislation that drives a lot of how the dietary supplement is still set up, right? In regards to ingredients and regulations and what you might have to. We could spend a whole episode just diving into that act and what it meant for the industry. But yeah, I did not know that before that it had been banned and that brought it back. So that's something else that I've learned today. And that does set the table in regards to why we're seeing it being used in supplements, because it's legal, even though it's banned, which we see that with other ingredients. There are, legal supplement ingredients that are, you could purchase as an average person, but would technically be against anti-doping regulation. So it's not the only ingredient that falls into that specific category, but it's good to know at least how it's set up right now. So knowing that it is banned, that's important for any drug tested athlete. But I'm seeing a lot of people start to take DHEA in a variety of different products for a variety of different reasons. It's not even always just athletic reasons. And these reasons are what I want to spend my next few questions asking you about, because you probably have kept, to be honest, a better eye on some of this research that's come out about it more than I have, even though it could be conflicting from time to time. So let's dive into some of the common, I don't want to say rumors, that's not the right term. I guess some of the common questions that I get in regards to, hey, I've heard DHA can do this. Is this true? Should I take it for this? Right. So let's break it down. There's a few different things and they're all somewhat different from each other. So actually, I'll switch up the order on you a little bit from what I sent you, just because you already brought this up. So you said that a lot of people were taking this initially for anti-aging purposes. That was kind of how it first came about before it got banned, back in the 80s. So I'm actually now seeing this again. I'm seeing DHEA people taking it for anti-aging purposes, really just the hope that it will slow the aging process and affect body composition in some kind of way. So I assume you're seeing this usage as well, but have you seen any evidence that actually supports this kind of usage?
It's probably the most common use of DHEA, to be honest with you, Brian. It just really is. So, I mean, like I mentioned before, humans, both men and women, start losing DHEA from their 30s until their 80s. Now, research has been slow somewhat in the area, but a couple of studies that have been done for longevity and life expectancy have a correlation between levels of DHEA, plasma levels of DHEA, and health. So people have seized on that and figure that, one, since it's available as a dietary supplement, they think it's safe. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a study that's been done. I'm looking at my notes here, where one researcher, Labrie, he's out of Canada, he's out of Quebec. He published in 2010 And if you think about it, DHEA has been a supplement ingredient since '94. So it's been around, that's almost 30 years now. Be 29 years this November, actually, to be exact. 29 years. If one looks at the literature for serious adverse events for DHEA and the FDA's database, there's no signal indicating that anyone's having these severe adverse events with DHEA. So it indicates, in reality, has an excellent safety profile. And in fact, that's what the researchers say. So I find that very interesting.
So you are seeing some research to that may support this idea of anti-aging, which I always think is kind of a funny term. You can't stop aging. We all do that minute by minute, day by day. But I understand what people are getting at, and there may be some research. It also sounds like we probably need more research. This has been around long enough, or we should actually have a few more studies that actually helps support this as well. But there may be a role that it plays in regards to that. I'm going to imagine if it's kind of playing a role in that, this one's, I guess, related to that, but I'm also seeing people take this as a potential for increase in muscle size and strength, which again is kind of body composition. So there's some layover there, but maybe that's a bit more on the, athletic physique side than it is the anti-aging side. But I am seeing that kind of usage as well, which that may obviously tie into using it, in a competition that might be banned. So you would have to be careful with that. But are you seeing potential research that does show there's some impact on muscle size, muscle strength, or do we not really have enough research in that area yet?
That's another one that's very interesting in that the research is conflicting. Some studies find a relationship between muscle mass and DHEA use. We call it supplementation in this case. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, it's more so on the elderly population where they've done a lot of these studies. I mean, there have been a few studies on younger folks in their 20s and 30s, but most of the work has been done on the elderly population. So I don't know how it's difficult to extrapolate those studies to the younger population because their endocrinology is different. But people still do, and that is one of the issues in that people see a study, and you mentioned this before. They see a study, it comes out in the news, and I guess that's the beauty of science. So science is we'll call it the ultimate autocorrector. Folks will come up with hypotheses, develop an experiment to test hypotheses, and then collect the data and then use those observations to see if their hypothesis is correct or not. And then the power of science is having many different individuals and institutions doing that, and that preponderance of evidence is what brings forth a cogent theory. That's kind of what's lacking for DHEA, to be honest with you. I mean, with DHEA being a supplement ingredient, I think it's kind of discouraged many folks from engaging in rigorous clinical trials on that ingredient.
Right.
So if it's a dietary ingredient, it's hard for people to make a drug out of it. Invest all that money it takes to do clinical trials if you can't patent it. So that is a serious limitation for a lot of studies on DHEA.
And a follow-up question, this is going backwards a little bit, but I'm just curious on the process of why it got banned. So we know it's banned, right, in regards to competition. Is it banned solely because we know DHEA, does play a role in the development of sex hormones, even though that may be a bit more minimal than we think? So is it solely banned on the understanding of what this hormone is, or is it banned because we've seen research that shows it may impact muscle size or muscle strength or recover, or do we have the evidence of okay, this would help you in a form of competition, or just do we have the evidence of we know what DHEA is as a hormone, or is it a combination of both? How did it get to the point where it got banned, I guess, is my follow-up question, now that we have a bit more understanding or lack thereof on really how much research is out there.
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I'm going to spitball a little bit on this, because to be on the WADA prohibited list, it has to meet 3 requirements. One of them is being advantageous, so it gives somebody advantage in sport. Mm-hmm. 2, it is detrimental to human health, so it becomes dangerous for the athletes to use. Or 3, it violates the spirit of sport. So those are the three criteria for it to get on the WADA prohibited list. There's argument for all three of those, so that's why it's on the list. It's weekly anabolic, so it's about 2,500 times less potent than testosterone, just to put it in perspective.
Yeah.
So let's say one was to use testosterone, a 10 milligram dose. You'd have to take a lot more DHEA, obviously. You're looking at 25 grams, probably almost of DHEA to get the same dosage as 10 milligrams of testosterone. That's the scale you're looking at there. But that's not to say that it doesn't have impacts on your peripheral tissues. I mean, peripheral tissues do include skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle as well. So it does have some action there. So one could say that provides an advantage in sport. One could say it would be you'd be hard pressed to, with the data out there, to say it's dangerous for health, especially with the adverse events reports and lack thereof. But then one could say if someone is taking DHEA to get an advantage, which I don't know any other reason why one would be doing that in the sporting world, so it would meet two of the three criteria. So that's probably how it got on the list.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know
now,
if it was
this is my conjecture.
Yeah, for sure. I was just curious as we were talking, like, is it more so like the understanding of what it is, or the research that we've has proven what it can do, which it may be a combination of the two, but it sounds like mostly like we have a pretty good idea on what this hormone is and what it can do. And even if it's, a lower percentage of anabolic agent than, testosterone or one of these others, clearly that's enough where you could take enough to provide some type of advantage. So it sounds like just more so the understanding, and we probably still need to up the research on it, but it sounds like that's going to be tricky for the reasons that you already stated, right? But that gets us a bigger picture on that side of things in regards to the ban aspect of things. I'm still a little bit curious on some of the actions that DHEA may or may not have in the body, because we've talked about a couple, anti-aging and muscle size. I get more. I even get more questions about this stuff. One of the ones I'll get will be people asking in regards to sexual functions, whether that be libido or something like infertility. I've heard that DHEA can, since it affects sex hormones, people will take it for those reasons as well. Is this a valid use, or is that just people connecting the dots, loosely on what DHEA actually does for you?
There is some evidence in the research and for all of those, actually. Okay. Some evidence. Now, is it good evidence? Has it been replicated by other scientists? There's, like I said before, there's not a lot of the research out there, so it may not have been replicated. Generally, a lot of these studies have a small number of subjects to them, so they lack the statistical power to be able to draw broad conclusions. That's one of the things in my reading that I see a lot of, is that underpowered studies with maybe 5 or 10 subjects. It's hard to draw conclusions on it.
Okay, so we do have some research there, but similar situation. We need some more. I hope maybe we get some people listening to this that need a research project. We're providing inspiration here. We need to look at this a little bit more, because we're seeing some stuff, but we need a bigger picture, I think, would be helpful for all of us. The last use question that I have for you, which is a bit more on the medical usage in regards to, not necessarily done for recreational reasons in any way, but I've seen DHEA being linked to conditions such as bone density, conditions such as depression, that there may be a role here that they can help with, that may even get prescribed in those kind of cases. Are you seeing that research as well? Or do you think these are specific things that DHEA could end up helping with?
I think that the research on that's still pretty new. Okay. I mean, cognitive function, depression, and all that. So you can actually lump all those together, whether it's infertility and doctors prescribing that for women that are on IVF, whether it is women's sexual libido, especially bone density and depression. So they're all kind of related, and likely the research still needs to be done to uncover it. So one of the researchers that's done quite a bit of work is a group, I don't know where they're out of, but they published Prowl, Clark, and Kling. I'm going to massacre their names. So those are their last names. They have quite a bit of research that's been published that I've read. And one of the things they say is, and I'll take this statement right from one of their reviews. The literature makes it clear that despite numerous studies of DHEA's effects in a variety of human, animal, and cell-based studies, there remain many questions about its possible molecular mechanisms and actions that need to be resolved. Preeminent researchers on DHEA are understanding, and they know that the molecular mechanisms of action need to be resolved. I mean, they have some studies where their subjects indicate that they respond well to DHEA, whether it's in IVF treatments, whether it's females and after menopause with bone density and depression. But they need to understand the molecular mechanisms so they can appropriately dose to people and understand also what else it's impacting too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest takeaways from this discussion is like the research just really isn't there yet. Like, yes, all of these things we're discussing about, may potentially be in play when it comes to using this stuff, but there's still a lot we don't know. And like you said, like dosages is hard to lay out when you don't have all the information and research to back, especially when the usage is being done for a variety of different reasons in the first place. So we've got some ways to go. And I'm wondering if this is one of the reasons why I don't end up hearing a ton about potential side effects. And you've actually alluded to this a couple of times as we're talking, because we're talking about all these different uses for DHEA. And then I'm wondering, okay, let's say someone does decide to take it for some of these reasons. What are potential side effects? Have you seen any? Are there some, even if they're anecdotal, that you've seen come out? I mean, what are common? I mean, obviously this could all be affected by the dosage that you're taking as well, but what are potential side effects that you've seen, if we even have any at this point?
So USADA published on their website about DHA specifically, and they list some of the side effects that anyone would get from anabolic steroid use. So
okay,
those are potentially in play. Now, when I read through the literature and these studies, none of these studies actually talk about their subjects becoming subjected to excess acne or women becoming hirsute and getting facial hair. So this is not something that the researchers are reporting on, but I'll put a caveat there in that the outcome that they are looking for here, so their endpoint of their research is not these particular issues. So it may be a bias because of how they design the studies that they're not looking at it, so they're not reporting on it. Right. I don't know. I just don't have that answer.
Right. But it is logical to think like, okay, if we know, this is considered an anabolic agent to, maybe, again, it could be a lesser extent than some of the other things you typically think of, but that being the main driver behind this being banned, we have to assume, I mean, you could connect the dots, right? That, like you said, there's a lot of this similar effects of something like an anabolic steroid would be in play. Now, it's probably going to take a whole lot more, and the dosage is going to have to be a lot higher than some of that. But that would make, at least in my mind, that would make sense as potential side effects. But yeah, it would again be nice to see that confirmed through more research, which I'm just fingers crossed in this conversation will start some of that. But yeah, that's how I've always answered that question. Is like, look, this is considered an anabolic agent, by WADA and USADA and all these other groups. The side effects of what those are because we just talked about them. Look, those are potentially in play here, depending on how much you're using, how often, and for what reasons. So I think that's good to know. A couple other, I guess, supplement related questions when it comes to DHEA, because I know that's really your expertise here. But when you are seeing this ingredient show up in supplements, is it often just straight up marketed on the label like, hey, buy my stuff, it's DHEA, it's right here on the front? Or is it something that you're seeing hidden in the formula? I'm sure you're seeing both, but what's more common? If they're going to use that, do they typically just straight up tell you that it's in the bottle?
Yeah, they're putting it right on the bottle. I mean, if you go to any of your health food stores or online shops, it'll either be called DHEA or dehydroepiandrosterone. Since it's a legal ingredient, there's no reason for them to hide it, and they don't. I mean, the market they're trying to get, the market that these folks are trying to get, I'm going to make it, this is my opinion, is the people who are older, whose bodies are no longer producing as much DHEA, and wish to supplement their DHEA to get it more, we'll call it youthful levels, right, to improve end of life scenarios.
Okay. I mean, that's, I guess in many ways helpful that that's where most of
Yeah,
the it's going, right? So it's not like because my worry is if you're an athlete, and let's say you're considering this for whatever muscle building, where those kind of reasons. Well, number one, after this conversation that it's a banned substance, but number two, pretty easy to spot if they're going to put it right there on the front. Now, I'm going to assume that there's some cases
exactly.
where they're hiding it into a mix or in a proprietary blend or some kind of muscle gainer or what it might be. I'm sure that's going to pop up as well. And if those products are happening, again, you probably see them come through more often than I do. Are there, and this can really apply to the supplement industry as a whole, even beyond just this specific ingredient. But are there red flags on supplements that hey, this might be a product that's hiding something like DHA in the mix, right? Like, are there things I should be aware of? If I'm not trying to take this, but this might be a product that has something like this in this, which could lead to a positive drug test. Like, what are some things I should be aware of in regards to some of those marketing red flags that I know that you see from time to time?
Yeah, so this is a huge pet peeve of mine. DHEA has got its carve out in both the Anabolic Steroid Control Act and DASCA Act. So we'll call it enterprising folks are selling products that have a couple of other ingredients that they call 7-keto DHEA and 4-DHEA. So if one was a consumer, so you're a consumer, Brian, if you saw those and you saw the DHEA in capital letters and whether it's preceded by a 4 or by 7-keto, you think DHEA, it's legal. Now, I'm talking, this is from people who may not be subjected to anti-doping testing. So folks that are using DHEA for other purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming part of your audience probably is that population. So those are not DHEA. And actually those are considered legal under the current laws, in my opinion. That they don't have a carve out within the Anabolic Steroid Control Acts. They are not DHEA. They are, we'll call them homologs or analogs of DHEA, but they are a different substance. And both of those substances are actually on the WADA prohibited list and Major League Baseball, NFL, and all the American Sports Leagues lists. So do not confuse the two or the three. DHEA is DHEA. Anything else that has numbers or letters in front of DHEA is not the same substance. It's not the substance produced by the body. And there is scant evidence that those would be safe because there's been no safety work done on them.
It's good to know. It sounds like there's a path to those products potentially pulled off the shelf if they don't have the backing as a dietary supplement ingredient previously used. That might be a separate discussion. But marketing,
That's the hope.
Yeah, so much of the supplement industry is marketing, right? And we could again probably spend an entire episode talking about red flags on products and what are things that like, hey, here's something to look out for. Here's categories that are risky, all that kind of stuff. Weaved this into so many different podcasts that what a big takeaway I want to take just from that simple marketing that you just talked about right there. That really highlights the importance of something like an NSF certified for sport program, right? Like what you do is ensure that what's inside the jar is what's on the label and that it's free from banned substances, right? Which would be any of the forms of DHEA that we're talking about. So I always tell people like, look, if especially if you're a drug tested athlete, but even if you're not, I would never buy a supplement that's not third party tested. Unless you got a lab at your house, because of the way the system is set up, that's the only way to really ensure what you're getting, is what it says it is, right? And especially if you're, someone that wants to stay away from DHEA as a drug tested athlete or whatever it might be, like that's the only way you can ensure it. Even if it's not, written on the front that it's inside, the only way you'll truly know is if someone has looked at it for you, right? Which is, I know, what you work on a regular basis, right? So keep up the good work with the program. Well, I guess we'll wrap this up with a pretty broad question. I guess I'll split it up into a couple of different topics. What's the future of DHEA in regards to supplements? Do you think this will eventually get to the point where it does become more controlled? Like it's enough of an anabolic agent where, okay, like maybe we probably should stop allowing this as a dietary supplement. It sounds like there's already people pushing for that. It's just the lobbying behind the industry is kind of preventing that. Do you think that we'll get to a point where it is pulled, or do you think, it'll be out there even more? And then you can follow that up with like any changes, to the industry as a whole as you see it coming up, right? Because people always ask me, if we've got these regulation issues in play, why is nobody doing anything about it? And I, kind of goes back to the lobbying in the industry. It's a messy question, right? So what changes do you see coming in regards to the industry, but also DHEA as an ingredient?
I don't think there will be any movement on DHEA as an ingredient.
Okay.
And I mean, sports world notwithstanding, I mean, there've probably been 40 years of doses for how many people have been taking it, and the lack of serious adverse events just leads regulators and Congress to believe there's not a safety issue with it. So at worst, it's doing nothing besides taking money out of somebody's pocket. And it's not harming people that are not. And I kind of put a joke, but it's not really a joking matter. It's like bodies on the floor. If people were in emergency rooms, like, so for instance, when Oxylete Pro was causing all those liver failures in Hawaii, I mean, the FDA mobilized very quickly to get to the bottom of the ingredient that was causing it. I think if DHEA were in that same kind of scenario, you would see movement and something happen, but there's just not the data there to do that.
Yeah.
And then as far as supplement regulations, there's been talk in the industry and an openness to revise DHEA. So there have been talks about a mandatory product listing, and the industry's kind of haggled about that with proponents and opponents of that approach. But they are open to changing the regulations after all these years and allowing and strengthening them in some cases where they need to be strengthened. And I think industry recognizes, there's some points that could be strengthened. And two, on FDA and everyone, there've been a lot of critics at FDA and how they regulate dietary supplements, but they are regulated. They're regulated as a category of food, even though they do have their own regulatory category. So they're generally, the presumption is they're safe, and it's the FDA's burden to determine it's unsafe by whatever means, adverse events, which would be what we just talked about, and that's their main mechanism for doing so. So if people aren't getting sick from it, they're not getting removed from the market. Now, that's not to say that some we'll call them enterprising marketers of some companies are not putting out active pharmaceuticals in dietary supplements and shouldn't be there. FDA has obtained their health fraud database for all the tainted dietary supplements, and the consumers can go on there and sign up for those alerts. So you'll know when a product has a knockoff of Viagra or Cialis, the PD5 sexual impotence drugs in them, or if they have sibutramine or Lorcaserin, which are all weight loss drugs. So those things are still occurring. They're still being removed from the market. I think everyone's wish is that we had enough funding for FDA to be able to effectively regulate and police all the industries that they serve, but that's just not the case.
Yeah. And, part of my frustration a little bit with not even just this setup, but our society as a whole is, we're a bit reactionary sometimes rather than being proactive. It's kind of one of those things where with DHEA, until something happens, probably won't change. Even with the supplement industry as a whole, like, I talk about it on a daily basis, and people are kind of surprised with some of the issues and setups that there might be. And until there's more of a, I guess, demand for some change, it's probably not going to be in the card. So it's going to have to be a bit more, until something happens. But I don't always love that. At that point, it could be too late depending on what the situation is. So yes, the supplement industry is 100% regulated. I just think there's some issues there in play, which allows, some people to take advantage of the setup. And so I just like to make people be aware of that, especially when it comes to an ingredient like DHEA, which is banned. But I think, something like today gives us consumers more knowledge and more information, especially when we're out there looking at these products. It can be overwhelming when you start reading, what can something do for you? What can it not? What are the risks? What is it? All that. So I wanted to put this information out there, and I appreciate you clarifying a lot of the stuff, for not only for myself, but for everybody tuning in. And I appreciate everything you're doing at NSF. I really want to close with another thank you on that, because of the industry that we're talking about. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a program out there like Certified for Sports. And we always, anybody out there, make sure what you buy, DHEA, whatever it is, third-party tested is really the only way to go. So thanks for your work with that, and thanks for your time today and sharing your knowledge, John. We truly appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Thanks, folks. I hope the listeners enjoyed it and got some information from me today.
Sounds good. I got some follow-up questions, so we'll do this again sometime soon.
Perfect.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.